Aziemi ma aieni ay kosi okutadia.
Kusoo dhawaada barnaamijkeena maanta aad iyo aad ayaan ku faraxsanahay inaad nagala soo qayb gashaan barnaamijkan aad iyo aad muhiimka u ah.
Bienvenidos a todos. Welcome to our session. We are glad you are here. We'd like to start our session with some different languages just to begin with the way that this experience is for all of us. I love it that Michael had a hard time with Florence's last name because that's just part of what this is all about. It just is some of what we need to deal with. And listening to different languages and to different accents is another piece that is so much part of working with immigrant and refugee families. And so we wanted to start out that way so that you could hear some different languages right from the start.
So we'd like to introduce ourselves and also to speculate on who you might be. This is Carol speaking. I'm Carol Siegel. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I do consultation to home visitors and clinicians around the state.
And I am Sadio R. I am a home visitor with a Head Start program in Ramsey County, and I do weekly home visits to immigrant families in the Ramsey County area.
And I am Jane Ellison, and I'm an early childhood mental health specialist and project manager for Greater St. Cloud Area Thrive that has as one of its projects something called the Access Project, which is specifically looking at opening access for immigrant and refugee families to early childhood special education services.
And I am Florence Orionzi. At the moment, I am a high school teacher, but training to become a parent educator. And I work with Jane also in Access Project.
And this is Carol speaking. We're going to try to remember to say our names, but as we get going, we might get a little loose about that, and we apologize ahead of time. We think that people who are listening are people who are either beginning home visiting with multicultural families or who have been doing it for quite a while and would like to open up some of these topics. So we think you might be public health nurses, you might be Head Start home visitors, early childhood special ed, early childhood family ed, and maybe some other home visiting programs like Healthy Families or
Growing Great Kids,
Nurse Family Partnership. And if we've left anybody out, we apologize, but we're welcoming all of you, thinking that we would really like to open up this topic for all of us, to talk about regularly.
So we were hoping that this is Jane, we were hoping that we would be able to show you a little clip of a video, again, so that you had a chance to see people, diverse representation, and hear some of the words, the language, the sense of what they are talking about. This particular video clip was from a panel of diverse presenters from immigrant and refugee populations in the St. Cloud area who conducted a number of what we called cultural forums in their communities around issues related to early childhood and special education. So this particular slide that you're looking at right now, I'm not going to read it to you, but it was one of the things that one of the presenters shared about how some of the folks in her particular group were thinking about how it was different living in the United States than living in Somalia, where that particular group was from. So throughout this presentation, we're hoping that we'll give you words from immigrant and refugee families who we've worked with, who we've had conversations about all these topics.
One thing I'd just like to say about accents is for us to remember as American English-speaking people that it might be just as hard for the families that we're visiting to understand what we're saying as it might be for us to understand the accents of the people that we work with.
So my favorite story about that was as I started working in the Access Project, and I had one of my first meetings where it was me and all of the other people in the room were immigrants and refugees. And after a 2-hour meeting, I came home and I said, I have never been so tired in my entire life. And it was the process of listening to the various accents and then translating them into oh yeah, that's what they're saying, and this rhythm of this sound is that, and this way that this sound is made is different from that. And I had to do that the whole time, and I was exhausted. And then I had exactly that thought, Carol, which is, oh my gosh, that's their life all the time, having to do that every single day. So just that sense of exhaustion is just huge for me.
Yeah, just to add to the apartment living, my family's experience was we just felt like we needed to keep things under control. We didn't want to live in an apartment because we didn't want to inconvenience somebody who might live above us or behind us. So for us, we really worked hard to, actually the first time we were going to rent a house where the upstairs was rented to one family and then downstairs, but we ended up renting the whole house just because we didn't want to, and we felt like we would be an inconvenience to the community. So
another layer of difficulty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and stress. And that was Florence, by the way, and you'll get to know her. Pretty soon you'll know her accent really well, and she won't have to say her name ever.
So, yeah. So this is Carol speaking. We're not trying to address all the issues that are components of the immigration or refugee experience, nor are we trying to address all the issues that have to do with home visiting. That was a little daunting. So what we did is make a little schematic so that we're just talking about this slice of the intersection between home visiting and issues about immigrant and refugee families. And we just like to remind you to do as much reading as you can and to not think that this is going to address all the issues that might come up for people who are home visiting with immigrant and refugee families. And I'm sure you know that, but I just wanted to say that.
Did.
Oh, you did? So just to let you guys know what the hesitation was, a different person is pushing the button for the slides to change than the person who's speaking, so you might hear that gap.
And sadly, she can't tell that I've already done it. So I think it actually changes later for her than for me. So you may hear some little hesitations there, but so I really am doing my job.
So this is Carol speaking. We just wanted to talk about the history of Minnesota for a minute because sometimes we just don't know that, and it makes it seem like this is all new. But in reality, Minnesota was actually an immigrant state, and it was considered that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were so many languages that voter instructions were printed in 9 different languages, and that was just typical. That was just how it was. And that throughout the early 1900s, Minnesota was known as being amongst the states that had the highest foreign-born residents. And that stayed for a long time until the early 1970s or so, and then in the mid-1970s is when churches and resettlement agencies began helping refugees. So there was just actually a small gap when Minnesota wasn't an immigrant state. So when the resettlement agencies started, they first were helping people who were from war-torn countries in Southeast Asia. But then it started to spread to Somalia, to when the USSR fell apart and all the constituent countries there, the folks were looking for places to go. So because Minnesota already had a way of managing, of figuring out how to provide housing and services for immigrants, it became a pathway for people from other countries as well. And by 2004, between 2004 and 2006, there were more than 18,000 refugees resettled in Minnesota. Just more than, one of the highest in the country. So at this point, about 7% of Minnesotans are foreign-born. And I don't need to read the slide. You can see what the 15 largest groups are. It's interesting to think about because those of us who work in this area, you might find so much higher representation from one area than another. Like in St. Paul, we might think it's highest from Southeast Asia. I don't know in St. Cloud.
Well, there's a growing Sudanese population in St. Cloud, and so Sudan is one of the ones that's just always in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And sometimes we think about, say, if you're in Minneapolis, we might think of Somalia as being the most heavily represented. So it's interesting to see how many countries are really represented in Minnesota. And another interesting thing is that our foreign-born population is different from the rest of the United States, whereas when we hear the national debate about immigration, it's often about people from Spanish-speaking countries. But that's just different here. Yeah. Just something for us to know. So just about the Twin Cities, about 80% of people born in other countries who live in Minnesota live in the Twin Cities. And so there's a huge amount of diversity in the public schools. So in Minneapolis, about 90 languages are spoken in the homes of the kids. And in St. Paul, it's about 103 languages. So you can imagine what it's like to provide translators for parents and the challenges both for the schools and for the families when there's a language that's not represented amongst the interpreters. And that 40% of kids are speaking a different language than English in their home.
And then just to add that, this is Sadia speaking, recently with our Early Head Start program, when I started working, it was back in 2009, and I think we had a vast majority of families of Hmong-speaking, Somali-speaking, African-American, and other ethnic groups. And right now, more than 80% of our families, I think I'm correct, and more than 80%, about 80% of our families are either from Burma, Burmese-speaking, Karen-speaking, Chin-speaking, Mo-speaking, and all these different languages from the Burma area. So it's really changing. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things you keep encountering, yes, I think it's over now, but in the beginning trying to get an interpreter, so they would write down Korean and they would be given a Korean interpreter, or they would write down Shin and they'd be given a Chinese interpreter. So you had to catch up with what you guys are experiencing.
Right. Wow. And as it changes so quickly, then the interpreters aren't available either.
Yeah,
so, yeah, absolutely. So this is Jane, and just to say a little bit about the St. Cloud area, because that's where some of the comments and things will be coming from in this presentation. And my own experience of coming to St. Cloud was interesting because I came from growing up in Chicago, Illinois, and I moved to Minneapolis that I thought was a small town, and then moved to St. Cloud and found out that I was wrong. Minneapolis wasn't a small town, and was told that actually St. Cloud was the big city for the people living around there. So it was a very different culture shock for me in my own personal experience. When I first moved there about 30 years ago, it really was a German Catholic farm family town. And I moved in and thought, oh my gosh, absolutely everybody here is German Catholic and used to live on a farm. And I felt totally like a fish out of water for myself. So it was a big thing for me. It's right now, there's about 60,000 people who live in St. Cloud. The greater St. Cloud area is about 100,000 people. But what's different in the St. Cloud area is the huge change. So right now, 30 years ago I came there, and honestly, there was what felt to me like no diversity at all. And now the African American population has swelled 283% from the year 2000 to 2010 in the St. Cloud area. The Asian American population increased 35%, and currently, and I think this was current at least 2 or 3 years ago, so it's probably changed again, but 28% students of color in the St. Cloud public schools. Now, compared to the cities, that doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to what people there have experienced, it's a huge change.
And we know that this is happening in other communities around Minnesota. Maybe the constituent groups are different, but the sudden influx of people from other countries has really been a challenge for these small communities that have always been homogenous.
Right. And I think that it's interesting because it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity in a couple of different ways. Obviously, it's an opportunity for the community to embrace diversity and get the benefits of diversity. But it also is an opportunity for the diverse people coming into the area because the community hasn't had a long history of addressing diverse issues. So it's almost like starting over. It's a new opportunity. And it can be, honestly, I think that there are times when it can ease the way. There are things that happen in the St. Cloud area that are really difficult to happen in a place like Chicago or a place like Minneapolis because there hasn't been that large history. So I think it's an interesting combination of both. I just was going to give a little, this is Jane again, a little background about this group, the St. Cloud focus groups, because as we go along with our presentation today, some of the words are going to be from parents who participated in these groups. So I wanted people to understand what they were. As part of our Access project, we had the opportunity to get a grant that allowed us, a couple of different grants, that allowed us to conduct what we called cultural forums. And what we did was we contracted with 5 different immigrant refugee organizations in the St. Cloud area to conduct a series of focus groups with immigrant refugee community members. We designed it that way because we learned that we were going to get the best information if we allowed groups that already had built trust to do those focus groups. And then this just describes a little bit about, this slide describes a little bit about who was recruited for that and what were some of the topics of those groups. But what you'll hear are some of the words from parents who participated in these focus groups.
And this is Carol. So the home visitor perspective. So Sadio is a home visitor, but she's not expected to represent all the different home visitors from everywhere. But I wanted to just put down some of the organizations that have contributed many of the ideas that we'll be talking about. So that's from Early Head Start, from Early Childhood Special Ed, Public Health. Most of the home visitors are female. Most are American-born and English-speaking, but many are bilingual or bicultural. And some are immigrants themselves or experienced immigration in their family. Some of the home visitors whose voices will be represented today, again, not just, Sadia is not speaking for everybody, but there are people from Burma, from Cambodia, from Somalia, from Eritrea, Ethiopia. So the list is, of course, on the slide. And many bilingual or trilingual home visitors, which is a real asset for us to understand many of the issues we'll be talking about. So we wanted to just do one clarifying idea about the difference between immigrants and refugees, because sometimes when we say that, it sounds like we're talking about just one experience. So immigrants are people who've moved to this country for economic opportunity or education or freedom of expression or because their families are here. People who have come, and I'm going to use the word choice even though sometimes it's not, it doesn't feel like free choice, but not made to leave their country. Whereas refugees are people who were forced to leave. And it could be for a series of reasons, such as fear, war, persecution, or disaster, and have resettled in this country. So it's just a different set of issues that we might be thinking about.
And then I want to add one thing to that. Immigrants and refugees can also overlap. When you're forced to leave your country and you seek refugee at another country, most of the times you're giving options, to different Western countries. You could choose from the United States to Australia to the British country to any other country. And most people, when I speak for myself, for my family, and for the Somali community, I think the reason why that we chose to come to the United States is because of the opportunities, that we can get here as immigrants. So we are refugees. At the same time, we came here for immigrant reasons to seek better opportunities.
Well, that's a really good point to recognize that it can overlap in that way.
Yeah, and mine is just a slight difference for me. I left my country, I fled my country, but coming to the United States wasn't my choice, but it was, I just said, my family just said, we do not go back, we do not want to go back to Uganda. We want to go anywhere else. So the countries that Sadio mentioned before, we applied and the U.S. accepted us first, and that's where we came. So,
right, so not choice.
Yeah.
And would you like to do this next slide?
Yes. So one of the things immigrant refugees struggle with is really a sense of belonging. And I'm speaking, this is Florence again. My personal experiences, it's really, I feel like I don't belong anywhere. I feel like I belong everywhere. So one of the things that is just sometimes sad, amazing, well, to me is when I'm now able to visit Uganda, and when I arrive at the airport, I have a family member, it could be my brother or a brother-in-law, waiting for me, but going through customs, I have to line with, say, foreigner. That just kind of hits me every time I go. When I get out of the plane and then I'm going into line to go through customs, local foreigners, and I have to go to the line of foreigners. That's just every time it just hits me, and it gives me emotions that sometimes I cannot even explain. Yeah. It's like, really? Yeah, I was born here. This is my country. Now I have to go. But I have a U.S. passport, which sometimes is a good thing for me. When I'm there, I get treated better because I have a U.S. citizen. Sometimes it's not. It's just weird. I feel like sometimes you're just in a state of mind. You really don't know where you belong. You belong everywhere and you don't belong anywhere. That's how I feel. So,
and then to add to that, this is Sadia speaking again, with my personal experience as a Somali American, I really had a tough time myself too, because sometimes, I want to say I'm American, but then, I'm also Somali, and there's so many different layers that come with that. I'm also Muslim American. So when somebody asks me, who are you, where are you from, I'm like, what should I say? Should I say I'm from Somalia? Should I say I'm American? It's really, one of those things that, you just have to express the different layers that come with that, identity that you have. And I know with most families that I'm working with right now, most of them are actually from Burma. Some of them are Karen. And then Karen has two different languages that they speak. They have Po Karen and Scout Karen. So when I go into the home visits, I have to be aware of that, which Karen am I speaking to? And then some of them are Burmese, or some of them are a mixture of all three of them. They have a Burmese mom, and then they have a dad that speaks Scout Karen, and then they have a grandmother that speaks Po Karen. So the kids are running around, and they're speaking three different languages, which is amazing, by the way. But, yeah, that just tells you that every culture has multiple layers within their culture. So,
yeah. So just to add one more thing, is because I moved here, but my children grew up here, and they are in that same position. They still, this is what Sadia is explaining, is my children actually of late have been expressing some anger with us that we didn't teach them our language, because as they went to college, they can't identify who they are. They feel like there's something missing. So,
yeah, wow. So that goes, this is Carol speaking, to the idea about cultural identity and practices, that it isn't that they stay with us wherever we live. It's not that we change our residence and so we change our status. It just comes with us. So I wanted to just reference a quote by a Chinese writer and scholar, which I learned long ago, and it just stuck with me, which is the idea, we think about nationalism or patriotism as kind of theoretical ideas, but the way he said it just really struck me. But it's, the love of the food one ate as a child. I mean, it's so embedded into who we are, regardless of where we live, what language we speak. Our early experiences kind of define who we remain.
True.
So there's, I think that one thing that we all know is that immigrants and refugees are coming into the United States and suddenly have to adapt to all different kinds of systems that work in very different ways than they may have experienced where they came from. So I don't know if either of you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, it's really confusing when, at least for me, when I arrived here, because you probably have, sorry, this is Florence again, and my voice is kind of getting. So the thing you probably have heard the saying that America is heaven. So when you're in Africa, your perception of America is really, it has everything. It's but you get here.
Guess what?
It's different. It's different. So that it's actually arriving is really you. I felt like, where am I? Who am I? It's just like you're in a day. And so, but for us, for my family, we were lucky that there were people who were in place to take care of our interests. So we just kind of said, yeah, we'll just go with whatever you tell us. And but but one thing about that was nice is, our children can go to school for free. Even though we pay tax, but just from there, if you did have school fees, your child didn't go to school. But that was a very nice thing for us.
Yeah.
So how long did you feel that days lasted?
I think probably months.
Because I think that's really useful for us to be thinking about
As home visitors.
Yeah.
Because we know that many home visitors are working with people who just arrived.
Yeah.
And for us to remember that there is that state of internal confusion that lasts a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I think I just say, I think I looked for my strengths to keep my children safe, because I had a 4-year-old and an 11-month baby. So I put all my effort, my energy to having the two be happy, and I forgot about myself. So, yeah.
And then, this is Sadia again. As a home visitor working with new immigrants that are coming to the country now, I can say, as home visitors, majority of our goal is to, be doing a lot of child development activities. But we notice that once we arrive in the home visit, usually more than, the time that we're there in the home visit, we're doing, a lot of the, like paperwork from the county, helping them with immigration status, like helping them get their food support, helping them with housing. So this is something that we work with our family on a daily basis, and we're actually putting a lot of our efforts in making sure that they're stable and that, that they're able to have a normal life before we talk about most of the child development stuff. So.
I mean, it's such a good point that you have to have stability before you can be learning new concepts about child development.
Right,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because if they're not stable, then, they can't really, meet the needs of their kids if they don't have the needs of their families met first. So.
Right.
So do you feel a conflict between that knowledge that you have and the demands of the job?
To be honest, in our program, I don't, because I feel like as a program, we support the families first. So, we have a support system within our team that, this is what we have to do for our family. But, we do have to get, other things done, like, giving them educational stuff related to child development and how to take care of their kids. But, they are parents. They know what they're doing. They have had kids before. They have the knowledge within them. They just need more of an empowerment than, telling them what to do on a daily basis.
And so it might be different for someone who's from special ed, or one of the home visiting programs that has a curriculum where they feel kind of an obligation to do the task, and yet you're saying that the stability is most important before you can do the task.
That's a really good point.
So this is Carol again. Just thinking about one example of how people have to adapt when they come here is this idea of in-home service and what that means. Was that such a thing that existed in their home country, and what are the implications? And one of the things that we've discovered is that many people are fearful that it is a government-sponsored program that has some kind of investment or intrusion into the lives of the individual families.
One of the experiences that we had in our Access project was those of us who were American-born and were working in early childhood had in our minds that the best way to set up a service would be to do something that was home visiting. And as we started to meet with the immigrant and refugee community members, community leaders, and talk about this, one of the first things that came out was, no, that won't work. We really need to do this as a group. And that was it was just a change. It was like I had to think different than I had originally thought, realizing, oh, no, it's going to feel safer and more appropriate to do what we were planning on doing as groups, not as home visits or individual.
So one thing that we experience with American-born and foreign-born parents is that they often can't tell the difference between one service and another. That there's so many services that are offered, and the clarity is so important to be that this is not child protection. This is not public health. This is, again, Sadi, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, in our program, they all call us Teramu, which means teacher, by the way, in Quran. So everyone that comes into the house is the teacher, and they all see us, like, as a teacher that's here to work with their kids. But like, Carol was saying, there's so many people that are working with them, whether it's from public health, whether it's from another service, whether it's from a Head Start program, that they don't really know, what the difference is. But it's, like she said, over time, the more that they work with us, the more that they know, who we really are and what we're here to do for them. So, yeah.
Oh, I have a comment here. Would it be possible to sit close to the speaker? So we all got to get in a little bit closer. It's hard to hear sometimes. Okay.
We will try and do that. Thanks for letting us know.
Comments are great because we're just, we've never done this before as a group, so we're just trying it. So thanks for letting us know. Okay. So just talking about home visiting in general, that we recognize that home visiting has just this built-in complexity. First, there's the idea that we are coming into somebody else's home, and there's the question of, are we being allowed? Are we being invited? Are we intruding? And then not only are we coming in, but our job says we're supposed to bring in ideas, and we're supposed to change things. So now we're on somebody else's territory, and we've got some ideas that we're going to bring forth, or we have to because of our position. And then we have to bring them out about the most deeply personal topic that there is, which is parenting. So not only are we in there in somebody else's territory with our own ideas, but it's on the most personal content of all. So there is this tension that's just built into home visiting. I think, Florence, you were going to say something?
But the,
I thought you were trying to say something. Sorry, I misread my cues.
I was reading really.
So just the one thing for us all to remember as the home visitors, that we each come from our own deeply rooted culture, and that part is hard to know when we're in the majority. And I think of it as cultural wallpaper. If we're used to going to people like us, we all have the same cultural wallpaper, and it's only when you go into somebody else's home and you see their wallpaper that you recognize that yours is different. But we got to be aware that different doesn't mean, and those who've heard me talk about this, I use this term that we don't get to claim that ours is standard and everybody else's is diverse. Right? It's just we grew up with ours, other people grew up with theirs, and we just have to recognize that we're bringing our assumptions into somebody else's cultural wallpaper.
I guess I did, this is Florence, I did what I was thinking about. I was actually thinking what I was going to say just there. So with what Carol just said, as a home visitor, you have what you want to bring to the family, but you also have to think about how is it going to be received. So it's like the first thing you have to do is build a relationship. So if you start from building a relationship, I think you'll get to a good start.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of part of the tension, because if each home visitor believes that in order to be a competent professional, I have to teach these practices because that's what my job says. But we've got these cultural, religious, racial, national, language differences, refugee experience, persecution, law, all these differences. How am I supposed to do that? How am I going to be able to understand the parent? How's the parent going to believe that I'm actually there to help? And that's our tension right there. So then I made another diagram, again, trying to just give us a small area of focus, that we're not expecting the home visitor to understand all aspects of the immigrant and refugee experience. Just this one slice is what we're going to be talking about today, this cross-cultural home visiting. That's our focus.
Which, you know, it's funny, we put in this slide of the goals for today now, and we said, why did we put it there and not right at the beginning? And we really felt like it was in the right place. So we almost needed to do all of this setup before we could say this is what we're trying to do today. Right. So these are our goals for today. We've already been trying to do some of it, and we'll continue to. But it really has to do with increasing the understanding of the experience of those who have come to this country, increasing awareness of how home visitors might be viewed by parents from diverse cultures, so we're hoping you'll get some sense of that. Increasing awareness of how home visiting evokes our own cultural patterns and beliefs, which is a little bit of what Carol was just starting to talk about, and understanding the need for us as home visitors who are American-born to inform ourselves about the people that we are home visiting.
Can I just add to that?
She can. Of course.
So we got to do that in order to understand the context of the people we're working with, but also to understand how we became who we are. Because you know, it's hard when, you know, sometimes we talk about what kind of culture you come from, and sometimes people say, well, I don't come from a culture. Right. Because you're always in your own wallpaper, you don't notice. So, but it's really clear that we each do. Absolutely. So that's why I put it in there, just so that we can just always remember to go back into, wait, what does it say about how I became the way I am, too? Absolutely. So just as one thing to think about as a home visitor, you know, is there ever monocultural home visiting? Because we talk about this a lot in the early Head Start program, is even when there are a lot of shared factors, there are really substantive differences between home visitors and families. One is socioeconomic differences. You know, we don't speak about class differences very readily in our culture, but there's middle class privilege, there's white privilege, there's educated privilege. It's just not the same. Differences in education, so the vocabulary we use, the language structure, the practice with challenging ideas. If we've had the good luck to go, I'm saying good luck, into advanced education, you know, you learn to challenge people's ideas. But if you haven't had that experience, maybe you don't know to speak up if you don't, or maybe you don't have the way to speak up if you don't agree. Then basic things like biological differences, psychological differences. If the home visitor has had the fortune to have sufficient nutrition in childhood and protected brain development and fewer traumas, it's just different. So even though we might think that if the language is the same and maybe the race is the same, maybe even the culture is the same, it's still not the same.
Yeah, this is Florence. I can just add one thing. Like if you came to my house right now and all my kids are home, you'll understand my children very quickly, but you will not understand me and my husband readily. So, but we are all in the same home.
That's right. That's right.
Example.
Great example. Yes.
So we're going to, what we want to do is to go through some different kind of categories and about cross-cultural differences in home visiting. And in each of these categories, we want to give kind of a parent perspective and a home visitor perspective. And again, we'll be bringing the voices of other people, so it's not just us that are speaking here, but just some perspectives on each of these. So the first one is really about communication. And there are so many pieces of communication in terms of home visiting with immigrant and refugee families. There's the obvious language differences. I loved when you were talking about that, and the multiple differences you can even have in a household is just, that's such a wonderful example, Sadio. The whole question of interpreters, one of the things that we're doing in the Access Project is to provide some training for interpreters because of the realization of how little is out there related to helping interpreters do that job in a way that works. And then home visitors who are now working with interpreters who haven't done that in the past really have no idea how to do that. So there's so many levels there that make it more complex and difficult. There's also just communication styles and then conventions, politeness, appropriateness, things like that. I know I'm often bumping up against some of those.
And then to add to that, you know, with our program, with the Early Head Start program, like I said before, we have a lot of different languages that we serve. I think we have more than 30. And with the interpreters, you know, with the families that we see, you know, we ask the families what they prefer, what type of preference they prefer. So we ask them if they want a female, if they want a male. And then usually after the first or second home visit, you know, I'll bring a different interpreter to ask them how they felt about the other interpreter, because they won't tell you if they like him or not, or if they're understanding. And at one incident, I had an interpreter that came out with me 2 weeks, and then the next week I brought a different one just to check it out. And then I asked the mom, how was the other interpreter? She said, I have no idea what he was saying. I did not understand what he was saying. And I was really shocked. I'm like, are you serious? You know?
Wait, that was the whole point.
Exactly. Yeah, and, you know, she said that, you know, she didn't want to tell me because she wanted to be polite, and she didn't want him to lose his job, and that's what she was thinking about.
Right.
So she felt like she had to be nice to him and just pretend like she was understanding when really she wasn't understanding. He was actually speaking, she said, half Burmese, half Karen. He was mixing it together, and she spoke full Burmese. So she didn't understand half of what he was saying. So that's really interesting. And then also with our program, the Early Head Start program, we have interpreters every other week. So 1 week we have an interpreter come out with us, and then the following week we go out on the home visits on our own due to budget reasons. So that week that we go out on our own, there's a lot of nonverbals going on. You know, we're like, you know, using gestures to communicate. Sometimes the family will talk to me in Korean. They'll say something, and then, you know, I'll nod, yeah, 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 yeah. And then I'll say something in English, and then they'll nod, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they'll say something in Korean. So back and forth, you know. And I think that's actually a really good learning opportunity, both for me. I'm learning a lot about their culture and their language, and also for the family, because they're learning a lot about the American culture and, you know, the language and all that. So really interesting.
It's also interesting when you say that now, Sadio, compared to when that first started.
Yeah, in the beginning.
In the beginning, because it was so hard to imagine, how do you have a home visit if you don't speak the language?
Exactly. Yeah.
But would you say that what you're saying is representative of everybody on the team?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I would come a real. Yeah. And I know from talking with people in early childhood special ed that the lack of interpreters has been really complicating. It's felt very, I hope it's not too strong a word to say, but almost like disrespectful, like they didn't have the funds to bring an interpreter. But you've had experience figuring out that there are other benefits that you didn't expect.
Yeah, and I had in the past before where we had interpreters, you know, when we didn't have such a high demand, we had interpreters every week for the families that needed them. And I can honestly say that I enjoy it now more, that I only have it every other week, because I'm actually getting to know the family even more at a different level the weeks that I go on without the interpreter, because I'm expressing myself in, I feel like, in a different language by doing the whole verbal thing and all that, nonverbal thing and all that, so.
Well, and there's that piece about how an interpreter is a barrier between the two of you.
Exactly.
So it's a bridge, which is great, but it's also a barrier. So that whole thing about you don't talk to the interpreter when you're talking to someone. Like if I'm trying to talk to Sadio, this is Jane, by the way, and I'm looking at Florence, and I'm talking to Sadio through Florence, how disrespectful that is, you know? But the problem is that I don't know your language, so it forces you to have a direct relationship, and which is really beneficial, it sounds like. So what a great experience.
Yeah. And then going back to the whole interpreter things, I noticed that once I find out who they like, the families, most of my families like the same interpreter because, you know, obviously they're great at their job. So what I do is I have that same interpreter coming out with me to every other home visit with all of my families. And they have really great relationship with them. I actually had a family that I was serving, and their child turned 3 years, and then they went to Head Start, and then mom got pregnant again, so she applied for our program again, and then she got in, but I didn't have an opening, so we had to give her to another home visitor, and she's like, oh, well, you know, bummer, I'm really disappointed that Sadio is not going to be working with me, but can I make a request? And I'm like, sure, what do you want? She's like, can I have the same interpreter that I was having before again? And that's really key.
Yeah.
That tells you the type of relationship that they have with these interpreters. So,
which you set up.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. By being there, one of the things that we've just started talking about in our group about interpreters is, and Sadio, you may have some good insight into this, is about what a different experience it is for a child to be speaking through an interpreter than it is for an adult to be doing that, especially the younger the child, how the child doesn't make a differentiation between a professional relationship and a personal relationship. And so for the child, if the interpreter is different each time, that makes no sense. They're not creating a relationship. Plus, the interpreter, one of our team members was saying, the interpreter has to break all of the rules about how you interpret when they're communicating with the child.
Right.
Because you can't do it in the way that you would do it with an adult.
Yeah, exactly. There is no such a thing as professionalism when you're talking to a little child,
Right.
you know, a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. In fact, most of the times, you know, what they're doing is nonverbal. They're not really, like, they don't have that capacity of speaking like a full-blown sentence anyways. So, yeah, it is really different with the child, you know, when they're just playing with them, like, hey, give me that ball, throw me that ball, versus having to have a deep conversation with the actual parent.
Right,
You know? So,
right.
Yeah,
Very
really,
different
very
experience.
different.
Yeah.
We've also talked a lot about the gender of the interpreter and the age of the interpreter and how different that is for the parent and your experience of bringing out a different person to find out how it was.
Yes.
Because sometimes, or even if they know the interpreter in the community, that can be a problem. We might have thought theoretically that would be helpful, but maybe not so much.
But not.
Yeah.
Exactly. And even to go back to that, like I have families, we have Somali families in the program who you would think that they want a Somali home visitor to work with them, but they would actually say, no, I don't want a Somali home visitor, just because of the community is very small, everybody knows each other, and, you know, they don't want that home visitor to come into their home and know about their business, so they would rather prefer an American or, you know, like a non-Somali home visitor to come into their home. So.
Yeah, just one thing from this conversation, it was just coming to me that when you said the family didn't want to tell you that they didn't understand anything.
Yeah.
So it just brought to my mind that also the background of the family. Carol mentioned before, some people come with trauma and that kind of thing. So for me personally, coming as a refugee, when I arrived here, I was so grateful that I felt like I shouldn't say anything bad about whatever services is there. So it's like, you think of where you come from and you're like, I'm here, no, I can't complain. So sometimes you have to be aware of that.
That is such a good point. Sometimes we experience the frustration from the home visitor because, I should talk louder? Okay. That the home visitor wants, it often happens with the conditions in the apartment, where the home visitor feels indignant because the family has to live with bugs, and the family is kind of saying, no, leave it alone, it's okay. And so we talk about that a lot, and that's a really interesting perspective, that it may be because they're here, so why complain? You know, that kind of, you know.
And there's a piece about that politeness thing when on the bottom where it says conventions, politeness, appropriateness. To some extent, I've learned that there's certain topics. I think money is one of them, where the person that's talking to me has some strong messages from their own background about what's appropriate and not appropriate to say about money. And I almost have to sometimes, because they'll say, it's not a problem, it's not a problem, it's not a problem, but really it's a problem. You know, it's like, I'm not getting this $50 that you told me I was going to get, you know, and then I have to realize, I have to override my, so it's really not a problem, and listening and believing that, and realizing, no, this would be a problem for them. So I'm going to ignore the fact they're saying it's not a problem and make sure they get their $50. So it's just been an interesting thing to me about that conventions around talking about money.
Well, and
you typically don't do as a home visitor, I realize, but I'm in a different position where I have to sometimes.
But one of the things that has given us a lot of pleasure, hilarity, is comments about one's physical appearance. Would you mind?
Sure.
I'll tell the story.
Yeah, I'll tell the story. It's really funny. I was at a home visit at one time, and the family, they said, there's multiple of them, actually. I'm trying to remember which one to talk about. So one of them, she said, you know, are you like, is that the pregnant one or the other one?
Which
You've got so many. Yeah, so she asked me, one of them asked me if I was pregnant, and I said, no, I'm not. And she's like, oh, well, you gained weight or something like that. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of awkward, you know. And then, I followed through and I asked her, you know, is that okay to be saying these kind of things in your culture? And she said, yeah, you know, and even if somebody asks you, you know, that you gain weight or that your hips are bigger or whatnot, it's actually a good thing because that means they care about you and they want you to lose weight, is what she said. So that was really interesting.
That is interesting.
Can I say my favorite one, when you came back from a home visit and you said, and you had told something about that, someone said you were getting fat, and you said, is that a compliment in your country? And they said no.
Yeah. And there's so many of them. I think I have the
you got married.
I think so, yeah. And some of them actually expect me to get pregnant, so they ask me every week, when are you getting pregnant? When is the baby coming?
That's how I've understood the whole game.
Yeah, exactly.
Just waiting.
Yeah.
Is it happening yet? So for the next slides, I'm just going to let you know that there will be some slides that we're not going to do anything with. And so when you do get access to this PowerPoint, you can make a copy and read these yourself. There are just lots of comments from different parents, but we wanted to leave them in here even though we're not going to do anything with them. Florence and I will read a few of them as we go through just because to get that parent voice. And again, these things are written down in the way that they were spoken sometimes, and they are just things that various people said in what we call our cultural forums, our opportunities from people from different cultures to talk about parenting, early childhood, etc. So I'll read this one from the Sudanese mom who said, the mom is illiterate and doesn't speak English like her child. It is a barrier between the mom and the child. The child may not know a word in their home language, so the mom can't communicate that idea to the child, which was definitely one of those ahas for me that I didn't get how damaging it was for the parent-child relationship when the children were learning English and were not learning the language in the home language, that then the parent couldn't have that relationship in the same way.
Can I add one comment to that?
Sure,
I can actually personally relate to that because I came here as a young child. My mom, she really believed in teaching me my home language, Somali, so I learned Somali as I grew up throughout the years. I had cousins, however, that their parents didn't teach them Somali because they felt like if they taught them Somali that they were going to have an accent when they went to school, so they figured, just teach them English, only that way they'll be proficient in English and they won't have any accents. So now those, my cousins are grown, we're about the same age, so every time that they have a conversation with their mom and I'm at the house, I feel like, I'm the interpreter in the house because I'm sitting in between the mother and the daughter and they do not understand each other, so I have to sit there and, interpret for them, so, yeah.
What a sad thing to have happened in that family.
Yeah. Another part of it that I'm familiar with, actually from my own mother, who grew up not speaking English, and then she didn't learn the sophisticated, the adult version of her language. She started speaking English at age 5, and so she couldn't talk about deep issues with her parents.
Yeah.
They could talk about surface issues,
right?
Going to the store, but anything that required meaningful language, sophisticated, she didn't have.
Yeah.
And she felt like there was this gap.
Yeah.
They just couldn't talk about really meaningful things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens. It's with language barrier, and it also happens the fact that you grow up here. So the different background, parents' background, and the children learning a different thing, that children can take advantage of that. And I see with my own children trying to tell me, no, you're doing this wrong. Right. And so,
on top of them being
yes.
Right.
On top of that,
yes. Yeah. So this one was a lady from Kenya. I was even hungry for 2 days when I arrived, and I did not know where to go shopping. I was told to go down 2 blocks and shop. 2 blocks? Blocks mean bricks in Africa, construction material, and so I did not know what that meant. So it's some of the in the norms, untaught norms, things that you just know.
Right.
It doesn't have to be explained. So block was, it didn't help this person. Yeah.
I had this because I've been doing this work now with the Access team, and what's happened is I've become more and more aware of the idioms that I use. Like I'll say something and I'll go, "That's ridiculous, isn't it?" Because that is meaningless, but we use that all the time. I can't think of one right off the top of my head. Off the top of my head.
Your head is right there.
We use them all the time, but what do they really mean?
I know of one of telling someone that a parent got bumped off the plane.
Oh. Oh no!
Right. That's a exactly. So yeah. So
I noticed that it's 9:30, and so we're going to be coming back to this next home visitor perspective in a minute. Except that it's the same one. But we're going to take a 5-minute break. So this is our 5-minute break. And anything we need to say specifically, Cindy, about that? Come back in 5 minutes. Sounds good. And they're going to mute this for us, I think.
A lot of the adults, a lot of the people or groups said that they had better childhood than their own children. And I was like, what is it? They were all describing the environment that they were living in. It was a better environment. We were not all in a prison of little apartments. We were outside. We were not sitting in front of TV. We were playing. We were creative. A lot of them said we didn't have toys, so we made toys. So a lot of them were making the toys. They were using their imaginations.
I had my aha moment thinking depression was a common thing about families here. And it was just the depression of the breakout of being an immigrant and being in a place that you don't really belong to. And I saw depression around me in that specific group when people start being more comfortable talking about it. But just until the point that they start being comfortable talking about it and they recognize depression. But it was just okay, this is part of my own experience. I have felt these things coming here to the United States and feeling alone, lonely, and dealing with not only winter but not knowing many things around me and not having my family around. And then when you put out layers of the words of these families, childcare, language, transportation, you feel trapped, and that's what they start recognizing, seeing, and once we could start having a conversation about this.
With our group, I know there was one of the things that came up was the level of trust. Majid talked about trust before. We got somebody just to say that it's like it's us and them, like it's me and the school. The school is always against me. So whatever I do, they are always going to not do well by my child. So that was just the mentality that if they tell you that your child has a problem, is it true? So that kind of thing, just the distrust of the system, we saw that was apparent. So that's probably one of the reasons somebody would say, no, my child doesn't have a problem. So they figure that the school is not there for their child, but it's against them.
All right, first this is Cindy Toppin with Targeted Home Visiting Coalition, and I just want to tell you a couple of things. First, I want to especially thank the Greater Twin Cities United Way and the MIFS for sponsoring these home visiting trainings. Both this year and last year, they've been extremely helpful. If you've missed any of the trainings, either from last year or this year, you can still access them as they are archived. You can also download them and listen to them while you're walking around the lake. Some home visitors have listened to the sessions on their own, and then their team has come together, and the team has reflected on what they've learned and how to incorporate the learning into practice. If you Google United Front Minnesota, you will find not only all our archived trainings, but you're going to find many other resources that the Minnesota Targeted Home Visiting Coalition has put together. So take a look at that. And then lastly, we especially want your comments today since this is the last session. Your comments are going to help us get continued funding so we can do more home visiting training. So please take the time on your evaluation to give us some feedback. What else would you like training on? What are your challenges in doing your job, and how can we help? And if you participated in the summer small groups, the reflective groups, were they useful and why? So please take the time to give your feedback. It will help us get continued funding into next year. And thank you all for listening. Thank you, Cindy.
All right, so we're going to move on, and the second cross-cultural differences piece that we wanted to talk a little bit about was different perceptions about the role of a home visitor, issues around boundaries, and what that whole issue of what the home visitor is coming to do versus what the family may need at the time. So let's just open things up again to comments or thoughts about different perceptions of the role.
Well, one thing that we've discussed a lot is about the boundaries around the role of home visitor and how that may not, the concept of home visitor may not exist in families who come from other countries. And so is this a friend? Is this a teacher? Is this a family member? And how those boundaries, we have kind of program prescribed boundaries and then culturally appropriate boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the questions about food and drink and things like that, that's certainly one of the ones that I know as a home visitor myself I've encountered coming into different families, and how uncomfortable it is to think, should I say no all the time? When it used to be something that I would just, it was easy for me just to say to American-born families, you know, we're not allowed to eat while we're at our home visit, blah, 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 and it became more and more uncomfortable.
And then with the families that I visit in early Head Start, you know, with the whole role thing, it's really confusing for them. Again, most of them are new immigrants, as I have said before. So some of them call us teachers, some of them call us social workers, some of them call us the family helper. So, you know, it can go from anywhere in the spectrum. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, they know that we're there to help them, and they just give us different labels for what we do. And then the whole thing with the food, you know, with the different cultures, over time I'm learning that with some cultures, I just have to say okay, because otherwise I'm going to offend them. So if I go to a Somali family and they offer me tea, of course I'm going to say, okay, I'll take the tea. Otherwise, I don't want them to, like, you know, assume something else or think that I'm being disrespectful to their culture. And then I can say the same thing about some of my Korean and Burmese family. If they offer me a bottle of water or if they give me a banana as I leave the home visit, I'll just take it and say, "Teramu, thank you," and, you know, just show them that I respect their culture. And that's part of our discussions that we have at the beginning of home visits usually, is we tell them, you know, that we're here to learn from them as home visitors, and we respect their cultures, and that if any time during the home visits they feel like that we're disrespecting their culture or we're doing something unknowingly that we don't know that we did, to tell us what that is, and, you know, and that's part of that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that comes up a lot is the kind of questions that are asked of the home visitor. Are you a parent? Are you married? Are you pregnant?
Yeah.
How old are you? How much money do you make? All these kinds of, and we talk a lot about maybe we have an American understanding that professionals don't reveal so much about themselves, but that isn't a shared understanding. And so can you talk a little bit about your comfort level with being asked all kinds of questions? Or
Yeah, you know, like with my family, because I have been recently married, they ask me if I'm pregnant or when I'm going to have a baby. So at the beginning, it was kind of a shock. I'm like, oh, my God. But, you know, over time, you know, I'm getting used to it, and I see it as a normal thing for them to ask, and it's becoming normal for me, too. And then I was having a conversation actually yesterday with one of my families, and she was telling me how in the Somali culture, you know, we have a lot of criticism in the culture. It doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, but like the older generation or the older people, they feel like they have to tell you what to do because, you know, as a way of playing a parent's role and, you know, supporting you or whatnot. So she was saying that how her husband, when they got married, her husband didn't gain any weight. And in the Somali culture, if the husband doesn't gain weight and the kids are not, you know, chunky, that means that she's not doing her job as a wife. She's not cooking good food, is what she said. So every time she goes to the Somali mall, every time she goes to the mosque or whatever, they'll tell her, oh, you're not feeding the husband right. Oh, you're not feeding your kids right. Do you want me to come to your house and teach you how to cook? and she said these comments are actually coming from people that are not related to her. They're not her friends, just, you know, strangers that are at the mall. And that was really interesting because with my generation, you know, with the Somali community, with my generation, I would say that would be a little bit kind of strange. But I can see how that's pretty common for, you know, different generations that are a little bit older than I am. So,
you know, that's really interesting because I've heard from Congolese parents that in the Congo, if the baby cries, anybody will tell you to feed the baby. Anybody, so you're sitting on the bus and feed that baby, and walking on the street, feed that baby, and that's just it's everybody's interest. Yeah.
So just a couple of parent perspectives on this one. One was just simply relationship building has to be the basic beginning.
Yeah, and then do not underestimate the parent's feeling of helplessness, especially if they have older children who assume power, leadership, and do not want to cooperate anymore. So this is just saying that being aware of such a thing and allow parents to express their knowledge. It's just to empower the parents to feel, no, it's just that you don't know what is here. You know something, it's just different. So,
and by the way, that picture is Florence, so if you want to know what she looks like when she talks, there she is. Yeah. So the Latino families who we've been working with have really spoken to about this feeling of helplessness and change of power in their families, and how incredibly damaging it is when the children have more power because of the whole language difference and all of that, and how that really upsets the whole the family when the parents feel helpless and powerless and can't take the leadership that they should be able to take. So I just think that that's a really important statement.
One other thing that's just about the idea of is it safe to have a home visitor is thinking about families who are undocumented.
Yes.
And though we may say that this is private, this is protected, if one is afraid that anything they say may mean that they will be separated from their children,
yes,
there's a guard that's set up that is, I think, is kind of incumbent on the home visitor to remember that our presence may be threatening.
Yes. Yes.
And that if someone lies to us, it may be in the service of them protecting their children rather than being unkind or not reliable. It's very different motivations.
Yeah. It's a totally different feeling when every minute of every day you have to be worried about people finding out that you're here.
About who knows you.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then to expect that just to turn off because you walk in and say you really are trustworthy, it's not going to turn off that quickly.
Oh, the other one that we've talked about quite a bit is when families invite the home visitor to a religious or a family celebration.
Yes.
That's not in work time.
Yes.
So just wondering how people have handled that.
With me personally, I had families that would, invite me to birthday parties or like the blessings of their child and whatnot. And usually what I tell them is that, if I'm not working at that time, I really can't make it or whatnot. But, I ask them to take pictures for me. And then on the following home visits, I would usually go over the pictures and talk about what they did and what their experience was. So
you hold a boundary, but you still are very, very interested.
Yeah.
And we know that some people have decided to do it a little bit differently, that they do go. But again, they hold the professional boundary internally, even though they're maybe at the birthday party. But the boundary is, I am still not a family member. I mean, I think it's a really hard decision and position to take.
And if you do a lot of home visits, one of the problems is how many of those birthday parties do you go to?
Exactly. And I live in Eden Prairie, which is pretty far from the St. Paul area. So that's one of the reasons why I can't come to St. Paul on the weekends. But, if it's like a current culture, like a New Year or something like that, usually I haven't been to one yet, but I have been planning on going to one. That way I can see all of my families at one event,
Yeah. That would feel different. Yeah.
But also, you're not expected to work on the weekend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that also comes from, for many cultures, at least for African cultures, relationships that you build must continue. So it's like you just don't know somebody and forget about them. So when they know you, they count you as the part of the family.
Yeah,
exactly.
So that would also be, so when the formal home visiting ends, that's a real issue.
Yeah. And I have a family from East Africa that had a child in our program. Their child transferred over to our Head Start program. and I think she transferred almost 2.5 years ago, and they still call me once in a while just to check up on me, see how I'm doing. They even call me on my holidays to wish me happy holidays too. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's very interesting.
But that is a really interesting thing, that we think about that also in terms of child development, that our structure says that we're supposed to change teachers or home visitors because a child turns a certain age. And we know that that doesn't make so much sense developmentally, but it also clearly doesn't make so much sense culturally.
Yeah, and for continuity.
Yeah.
So you know, the child at 2, really, your relationship with the child must continue.
That's right.
Exactly.
It's still going to help that child.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's part of what we've been thinking about on the systems issue, is how to make our system reflect more about what we know developmentally and culturally.
The next area that we thought we could talk a little bit about was perceptions about family and parenting. Who's in the family, nuclear family, extended family, who's responsible for raising children, respect and care for elders, goals of child rearing, safety issues, etc. So just some thoughts about these topics in terms of home visiting.
This is interesting because for my one of my classes, I was reading my textbook, and it was list who is in your family. I remember listing. I ended up saying anybody that I can't marry.
Anybody that you can't marry?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
Because that's how it works for everybody's family, except if you can't. If they are not your relative, you can marry them. Actually, they said that right. Everybody is my family except those I can marry. I said it the other way around. Yes. So it's like anybody I can actually get married to, that's not family. Otherwise
everybody is. So the question in a way doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
There's way too many people.
But it's also true in thinking about who do we want on a home visit.
Right.
In an American mind, we might be thinking nuclear family.
Yep.
Yes.
But for the family, that might
Really extended.
Yeah.
Very extended. Like I have families that I visit with that have multi-generational. They have the parents are living with their parents, who also have their parents living with them, and then they also have a great-grandmother who's living with them, and they're all living in the same house. So it's very extended family, multi-generational family.
And how would they answer the question, who is responsible for for caring for the children?
I think they would say all of them are responsible. You know, it's like a community. It's like a family community that's living together, and they're all responsible for the betterment of their children together as a family. It's not just the mom and dad.
Right. So we have to be thinking about who do we invite to community activities,
socialization. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And also, I think that it is challenging for home visitors when our way of thinking is that we are supporting a dyad, possibly, like a mom and a child, or a mom and a dad and 2 children. That's who we're supporting by coming to the home visits. And the expectations of the family may be that it's just as good to have auntie there, or to have Uncle so-and-so there, or to have grandma there. And whereas you're thinking of these people, you're not thinking that I'm working with that person too. But it's very different for the families.
Yeah, and I also reflect on that famous African proverb, I think, which says that it takes a community to raise a child. I think that's very true for a lot of African communities and also for all over the world. I think it's all over the globe. Like every family that I have come across, I've seen that they have extended families that are involved in raising their children, and it literally takes a community to raise their children. So.
Part of what I think where we find a lot of clash is that there are actually different goals in child rearing. That in American culture, historically, I was going to say of late, I think historically too, it's really been about the individual. Individual success is the goal. And that's very different from many, many cultures.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So just a couple of, again, we won't read through all of these, and you can get them on your PowerPoint when you make a copy. But one of the Sudanese parents that we talked to said the parents who are not educated find it difficult to assist their children in doing their homework. The parent feels dead because they can't help their kid. If they are alive, they are supposed to help their children. And again, how much that role of the parent has been pulled out from under them in coming here.
Just the phrase, I mean, the word dead, for them to use that word, it really means, you cannot, it means it's painful. They brought this child to the world and they can't bring them up the way. Really,
And I think that I like that quote because of you can feel the pain. And I think sometimes we can hear things intellectually but not get how it feels. And when you're in the home with a family where that's how the mom is feeling, to know that, to have a sense of what that actually feels like.
And I can imagine somebody probably has said that to her. You are dead to your children.
Oh, wow. So there's several of these comments that really have to do with what you were talking about, where it takes a village and we need to be working together. We were just going to read one other comment.
Children were taught by their parents. Now they don't take decisions from parents. Instead, it comes from the TV. They used to learn from the mother, such as mom singing for them. But now they learn all that through toys. So it's that difference of how does a young child learn. So you talk to the child, whether the child speaks or not, but your interaction with the child is. But here parents are feel like children would rather watch TV, so they learn things from the TV, and so things like singing are really important. Singing to children. So here the opportunity is not there. It feels like the opportunity is not there. So it's like you have that parental instinct. What you experienced when you were growing up, but you feel like you can't give it to your own child. So that really feels it feels painful.
And I think it's actually our responsibility as home visitors is to find out what are the ways that parents traditionally teach children, so that there isn't an override of that. You know, if we come in with toys and a curriculum and a structure, and it overrides what the parent feels like he or she can bring,
right?
It changes the dynamic of who's in charge. But it's so challenging because there are curricula.
And some of the things that we do as home visitors that really help us is, when we do home visits, we tell the families that we're getting to know them and we really know what works for them in the home with their child. So every week we ask them, for their input, what do they think works best for them? What type of activities do they enjoy? Do they want us not to have that toys and just take a walk outside, for 30 minutes and just walk around the block, talk about the cars, whatever? And if that's what they want, that's what we do, So you just have to figure out, where the family is and meet them where they are. And remember that every family and every child is different, and the curriculum doesn't fit all of them. You have to individualize the services for them, and you have to meet each family individually where they are and give them the services that they need. So,
and one of the tensions that you talked about is parents want to do from a traditional culture, but they also want their children to be American and to be prepared for American school.
Right.
So there's that conflict there between I know how I would do it, but maybe you know something.
Right.
I hate to use the word better, but maybe that's how it feels sometimes. Maybe you know something that will fit better in the American school system, and they don't want to deprive their children of that, and yet we don't want to take away the traditional parts that make people feel relaxed and confident.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of reminding them that, the importance of, having their children learn about their culture, having their children learn about their language, like the beauty of that, and reminding them that, and giving them examples of how that could help them in the long run as they develop, so.
Yeah. It also can be an opportunity if one can, I think that part of the trick here is wrapping your mind around the thought that toys aren't always the answer. I mean, I think that as early childhood people, we're just, toys aren't always toys, and then we're going to have the children do this with the toys, and, we think that way so much. So it's wrapping your mind around that and realizing, and then it can be a coming together of the two. If you build that relationship, and then the conversation is about let's do some of the pieces that you do, have done, grew up with, that are also so valuable because it does this, this, and this, and I'll bring in a little bit of what they're going to be encountering in school so that they're also getting some of that. So it can be a coming together, but it comes with that relationship and the awareness to that you're coming together from some different perspectives. Oops. So roles, conflict between families and home visitors' expectations due to gender and age. We talked a little bit about that, expectation in marriage. Anything else we want to say about this one?
Well, this is one that I experience home visitors having their own personal reaction to a lot, which may have to do with gender expectations for the children, expectations for or understanding of how marriage is supposed to work in a kind of a, you know, as women, we have worked to achieve a certain kind of independence and feel like that's the right way, and that girls should be taught from early on that they can do anything, and then to encounter different perspectives based on other people's cultures is challenging for many home visitors.
Yeah, I mean, if the message is that we're not going to let the boys play with the nurturing toys, which is that's one of the things that's come up with some of the folks that I've worked with, then, yeah, that desire to say, wait, boys can do nurturing too, and girls can do anything, and that's kind of what we want to bring in, rather than being able to sit with a very different perspective.
And can we sit with it?
And can we sit with it?
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the families, you know, themselves are from, you know, backgrounds of being in arranged marriage, having a very difference in the age of the father and the mother. So talking about that sometimes, you know, it can be really tricky, you know, and, you know, having those kind of deep conversations with them.
It's why we think it's really useful to be able to process that with your team, because those reactions are still there. We bring it back to the team so we can say, you know, I had an experience, and, you know, is this a cultural difference? Is this a human rights difference? How do we think about this?
Yeah.
And not that we have a solution. No, just recognize it as a real challenge sometimes.
Yeah, and every culture is very different. Some cultures, you know, you see the mothers are very assertive. They're very well-spoken. You know, they're very, like, advocating for their kids. And then other families, you know, the mothers also have, you know, those capabilities, but, you know, because of their cultural backgrounds, you know, they feel like that it's not their role to be doing some of those things or whatnot. So, you know, just empowering them and letting them know that, you know, they are actually the advocates for their child and they can be speaking up for their kids and all that stuff.
And I think part of the trick for it is that also knowing that because you know of 3 or 4 families in a particular culture where it's this way, that the 5th one may be very different.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we've had some wonderful conversations with 2 Somali women saying the opposite in terms of what they think is the right thing. You know, so it's kind of like, okay, got it. Yep. Of course, I mean, not everybody here agrees. Why would we think that was true anywhere else? So part of the trick is learning what it is, and learning and understanding first what their perception is.
Can I bring up a difficult one?
Oh, yes, please do.
What about violence in the home? Because we encounter this a lot.
So I work at a battered women's shelter, and there's a Somali woman who works in that shelter with us, and we have had some conversations about that. I'm not going to pretend to have the answer here at all, but what was a little bit helpful for me was, rather than thinking about, you know, are we going to say it's okay or not, is thinking more about how it gets addressed when it occurs. And I'm not going to be able to do this very well because I hadn't really thought it through before we started talking, but I know that she talked about some different steps that had to do with not necessarily going a legal route, but going the route of going to leadership in the community or to the extended family, or there were some different ways of approaching the question rather than the way that we might typically think of. And now that you've brought it up, I'd like to go back and have more conversations with her about it.
And I was thinking some of the difficulties there is families who say, I'm just saying, for example, the mother of the child is the one who's been abused. She's going to protect the father. She's not going to want because in her mind, if there is a report, or he will be taken to jail, and so what would I do? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, to say that will weigh heavily. I want my child to have both of us.
Yep.
So, and if maybe she comes from a background where that was done in the home, so it's like, it's normal. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So she may intellectually she may know that this is wrong, but emotionally and just saying I want to keep the family together, they might not talk about it.
Right. And I think home visitors experience that a lot.
Yeah.
So they have this knowledge that it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And, like you said, some of them do have the knowledge that this is not right. And it doesn't just have to be physical abuse. It can be verbal abuse, too. It could be so many different levels of abuse. But like you said, they know that this is not right. But some of them is having the fear of coming to a new country, not knowing what the resources are, not even knowing how to get out of it. And some of them actually do attempt to get out of situations, but when they get out, because they don't have enough support, somehow they end up coming back to that situation. So it's really, really hard, to empower them and to find the resources that will take them fully out of that situation, especially if they don't have any families here, if they don't have any friends. They're very isolated. And there's just different components and different layers that come with that, and it gets really, really tricky. When they talk about it and, they express how they feel about it. So.
And again, just the importance of being able to talk with your team, because holding that kind of knowledge and experience and pain is really hard.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And we have a question here that's come in. I'm guessing this is to you, Sadio. Are you seeing much use of betel nut in the Karen families? And if so, first, are you seeing that?
I'm seeing it to some extent. I wouldn't say a lot, but I'm seeing a few of them.
And then it says, how do you respond if it's pregnant women?
I haven't really had a pregnant woman that is doing that. And to be honest, I haven't really done any research to find out what the effects are of those on pregnant women. So I haven't really had that experience yet. But if it does come up in the future, it's something that I would we do have a public health nurse that's working with us in our program, so it's something that I would bring her as a resource, and I would have her talk to the family about that and the effects of the pregnancy of the mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you explain what betel nut is for people who don't know?
To be honest, I don't really
know. You don't know? Okay.
I see it, but I have no idea what the ingredients are.
Or at least what you see, so that if people are visiting and they see something like it, they might know.
Yeah, it's just like nuts and like a little wrap thing. I don't know what that is called, and they just chew on it. And it kind of looks red, I think, when you're chewing on it. It has a color like a darker tone color to it. So, yeah. But I was told it doesn't have anything on it. Like it doesn't have any like caffeine or anything like that, or any of tobacco or anything like that.
Just something. It's
just something that they do for fun, kind of thing. So just a habit. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Thanks. Feel free to send it like that. Carol is monitoring the questions. So again, we just had a couple of parent perspectives. We have quite a few here, but we're, again, not going to read them all. You can look at them yourself. But one was from a Somali family. We taught our girls to do house chores by age 4 and beyond, and the boys went with their dad and learned to work with their dad.
Then from African Women's Alliance, parents have distinct roles. Children birth to age 5 to be taken care of by the mother.
And then going back to the Somali family, what they said about girls being taught how to do chores and having that role in the household, I can say coming to the United States, that's really changing. It's not like that anymore. In fact, if you look at studies, you will see that Somali girls graduating from college are way more than the Somali boys that are graduating from college. Girls are embracing going to school. They're very involved. The parents, the mothers, and both parents are usually involved in their education. So the role of having the child or the daughter stay at home and teaching her how to cook and clean and preparing her to become the appropriate wife is not really something that's happening right now. It's something that we have overcome. And with generations coming up, it's not looking like that anymore. Yeah.
That's a really good perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then what would you say, is there a gender equal idea about chores then at this point? Or is it more that chores have fallen off?
I would say gender equal. Like in my household, even though I was the only child on my mom's side, but seeing cousins that, had siblings, it would be equal. Like the boy would do the laundry, the girl would wash the dishes. The boy would lawn the mall, and the girl would she would do something else, I don't know, like different things in the household. So I would say it's becoming more equal now than before.
So we're going to go a little more quickly over a couple of these other cross-cultural differences. There's a couple more to do. One is this one about different thinking about mental health and illness, other difficulties, also challenging sorting out language differences from education, from trauma, from disorientation due to immigration, from mental illness.
This is a big one for us, and I think it's a big one for early childhood special ed.
Yeah.
How do you talk about cognitive delays, deafness, mental illness, when in some cases there's no language for it, there's no words, and in other cases people who were born with those disabilities were really considered to not be in public. I mean, we have worked with some families, deafness is one of the examples, where the parent who is deaf was given no education at all, and the home visitor had to figure out how to communicate non-verbally with someone who is deaf and has had no educational experience and also can't communicate with their own children. And that's been the idea that a deaf person can learn in some cases has been a real challenge for the home visitors to think about with the families.
Yeah.
I was just going to say this is basically one of the major purposes of the Access Project, and so we just do a ton. We've talked for 2.5 years about all these questions about how do we talk about children with special needs within the cultural groups that are part of our team, and how do we provide support and help for the children to get moved forward developmentally within a context where that may not be something that the families understand or see in the same way, et cetera. So lots and lots of conversations. So my whole point is just that this is a really big thing, and it's not there aren't any simple answers to it.
No, but the reason that second one is bolded is that for the parents, we've spent a lot of time trying to understand when a parent is difficult to engage or is not constant over time, how much of that is a language problem, how much of that is trauma, how much of that is disorientation, as you were talking about, Florence, due to immigration, how much of it is education differences, and how do you begin to sort that out?
Yeah.
And the only way we know is we talk, and we try to figure out we try to remember all those elements and think about, so we talk about what do the neighbors think about that person. And sometimes we get information there that everybody knows that mom has a lot of trouble. We hear that maybe from the neighbors or who are also in the program or something like that, to try to figure out how do we even get a grasp around what's causing so much difficulty in the parent's mind.
Yeah.
So again, not that we have the answer, but just keeping all those questions open.
Yep. Just a couple of parent perspective ones. Just in terms of understanding a little bit different. Oops, that wasn't the one I was thinking of. If they have a little stomach and fat cheeks, then they look healthy. The physical appearance were the clues we looked for to see if they were healthy.
And
you have something?
it's okay. I was going to say, with a Somali family that I'm working with currently, the mom is, feeding the baby. She's overfeeding him, to the point that, she would give him milk until he gags or whatnot. And this goes back to, again, like the cultural perspective that if the child is not chunky enough, the community would judge her and say, you're not a good mom, you're not feeding your kids well and all of that. And then, we're talking to her about these kind of conversations and saying that, if your child looks healthy, they're healthy, it could be difficult, especially when there's all those different, layers of stigmas that come with that, and having a skinny baby versus having a chunky baby. And I talked to her about, how that went back to, back when they were in Somalia, like how our parents were in Somalia. And she said that usually they overfed us until we were 6 months, until we were chunky, and everybody could see us that we were chunky. And then after that, they just let us grow and, kind of lose the weight or whatever. So,
well, and do you think that was because there had been such a history of famine in the country? That you have to protect the babies, buffer them as much as you can in the beginning?
I think so. I think that's one of the variables. And then also, depending on what regions that you're from, a lot of them were nomads. So they were moving from one place to another. Even when the baby is like maybe a week old, they would have to move from one town to another by walking or whatnot. So they had to make sure that the baby was fed full, to be able to get from one city to the next city, so, yeah.
Makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And how important it is for us to be thinking about the cultural context.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one from a Latino perspective. A family that does not have insurance cannot make multiple or doctor visits. My son was very sick once from an ear infection and respiratory problem. When I made an appointment, the worker told me that I needed 2 separate appointments, one for the ear infection and one for the respiratory issues. I could not afford this.
Really good point.
So it's almost quarter after, and we were going to move on to that other section. Should I scoot by this, or did you want to talk a little bit about eating first?
This one is so important.
I know.
We really want to apologize to the audience. We were thinking this might happen because we have a lot of stories. We have a lot of topics too, but we also, at least in our experience, stories are what we tend to retain because it makes things more personal. So we hope that you don't mind if we don't get to all of the content. And feedback would be great to know if this way of doing it is useful or if you'd rather have a more streamlined discussion of all the content pieces. But Jane, if it's okay with you, if we can just do the eating.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all right with that.
It is just eating is huge. There is, as it's the first line on the PowerPoint says, there is nothing more culturally determined than what and how we feed our kids. And that we as home visitors, I would imagine, knowing myself and other people, that we sometimes actually get offended by how kids in other homes are fed, or repulsed by kids, and that's nothing we would do, so it must be wrong. And we have to kind of unearth that because we just grew up with our way.
Exactly.
And I'm going to just do something quick here, and then we'll go right back to eating, which is just say eating, sleeping, toileting, teaching.
Yes.
That it's about all of, and discipline. It's about all of those things. So eating, sleeping, toileting, teaching, discipline, and how we do have strong feelings about many of those. I think the two of the strongest are eating and sleeping at this point right now.
And to bring a point about the eating, one of the assessments that we use is the ASQSE, which is the social behavior. And one of the questions on that is, do you enjoy mealtime together? And I can say almost all of our families say no, mainly because they don't eat together. They eat separately. They usually eat on the floor. They feed their kids on the floor. And also with a lot of different cultures, when you ask them, does your child eat with a spoon? Does your child, eat with a fork? They'll say no because they feed their child until they're like 5 or 6 years old or until they go to school. So that's really it's really mind-opening to go into home visits where parents are feeding their children different styles, different ways. And then also the type of food that they eat. When we do nutrition assessments, we're talking about the different areas of the food group. We're talking about protein, vegetables, fruits, all of that. And they look at us and they say, you know what, we only eat rice. And you just have to sit there and say, okay, your child looks healthy, you're doing it right, okay, let's write rice down,
And for us to remember that in any culture where kids are fed until, by American standards, they're old, they all learn to eat.
Right.
They all learn to feed themselves. So we might believe that it has to be done by a certain age, but the reality is that there's probably I can't think of a culture where the adults don't know how to feed themselves.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I just think that's so important to remember. Yeah, exactly.
But can I ask you, so what do you think about the nutritional part? There's an expectation to teach families. There's a reality that families say all we eat is rice.
Right.
What do you do with that?
what we do with that, as a program is, we talk about the nutrition, we talk about the different values of the different food groups, and we talk about what's recommended for that child's age-appropriate group. And we tell them, like different ways that they can, eat their rice, if they want to eat their rice with like steamed vegetables, or if they want to, instead of giving the child juice, if they just want to blend some fruits together and give them that as juice. So what we see as home visitors, we see our role as, to give the information to the family, to provide them with the information, and then let them take the role of deciding how to do it and what they think is appropriate for their family and what's going to work for their family.
And it's interesting you say that. I know that for the public health nurses, one of the very tense issues is around the back-to-sleep idea. And they feel such responsibility to prevent SIDS that sometimes families don't do that. They sleep the way they sleep. And so possibly your idea is it can be translated to that you give the information, we say what the recommendation is, and then really it's up to the family to decide.
Exactly. Yeah, and we do have a lot of families that are co-sleeping with our infants, and we talk about this with them, and at the end of the day, they decide what they think is best for their family. So.
Exactly. But I know that some nurses really feel almost personally responsible to convince the parents just because they're so scared.
Exactly.
But I think your point is a really good one, is that it is their job to give the information, and then the parents will decide for themselves what they're going to do.
And just back to the whole idea of having an opportunity to get to talk with your colleagues to process some of this. That's part of being able to do that process without giving off a sense of judgment. So I think that, I can come in and I can say, these are the things that are recommended these days, and these are the reasons why, and it can feel to a parent like I'm just giving you some information, you can do with it because I respect you as a parent, and your children are healthy and things are going well. Or they can hear it as, and I really think you're doing this wrong, and I'm really concerned, and I don't trust you. So, and that comes off with how we're feeling inside. So that whole point about needing to talk about it, process it, is so important in these things, so that we can come off as non-judgmental.
Yeah. So I would just like, if the nurse feels like they just need to teach that parent. So just recently, a parent with an infant said her baby just doesn't sleep the way she's instructed they should. Is it back or stomach or what? But she said the way she's being told, that's the way the baby doesn't sleep. So what? But then she just said, that's the way he can sleep.
And especially if people don't have their families, their parents to help them with the way that it has always been done.
Right.
And then there's this new way that's not working, then what do you do?
One of the things that came up in one of our meetings was just a realization by the immigrant and refugee folks who were participating that some of the things that they brought from their homes, we actually realized were better than what we do here. So that was another thing that just kind of that oh, you mean you, like more nursing, holding and carrying, slings, that, yes, those are great things. Do those. Those are awesome.
American culture catches up.
And our culture hasn't caught up to that. Yeah, exactly.
So we unfortunately don't have much time left, but there are some issues we would like to get to. One of them is thinking about what are the experiences that parents have had that are affecting their parenting now, and how incumbent it is on us as American home visitors to become familiar with those things so that they become part of the dialogue. Sometimes parents don't know it's okay to talk about things. If we don't remember to bring them up, or if we don't know about them, it might not happen. So one of the things that we've been thinking about, if people are coming from different countries, such as, say, Mexico or Central America, they may already have children that they have left so that they can go earn money and send it back to them. So unless we ask, have you had other children, we might be thinking of that parent as a first-time parent, and actually they're mourning that their children are growing up without them in another country. So that's one of those.
A huge one, yeah.
Another might be families that are coming from refugee camp or from war may have lost entire families that unless we think about that may not come up. So there are just a few of these, and then there are the issues. It's okay if I just get.
I think we should keep going through this.
Yep. A little. Yep. There also may be issues that a home visitor can't ask about because she doesn't know it exists. And we did want to talk about one of those because it turns out it's so important in Karen culture, but there's no way we would have even known to ask about it. So that's.
Yeah, I'll just go over this really quickly. I had a mom who was pregnant. She had a miscarriage, I believe. She went into the doctor, and the doctor said that, they had to clean the miscarriage or whatnot. She came to me, and she said, I'm afraid of doing that, and I asked her why, and she said, I think I might be having a dry baby. At that point, I was really clueless. I had no idea what dry baby was. She told me that in the Karen culture or Burmese culture, if the woman gets pregnant and the baby dies inside of her, they let the baby stay until full term, and then she gives birth to that baby, who is called the dry baby, and that baby becomes part of the family. They have a name, they get married, they go to school. They're part of that family. They're fed, they play their role in the family. She even said at some point when mom goes to sleep, that baby will put money under mom's pillow, letting her know that he's part of the family or he or she is involved in the family. And that was a really interesting phenomenon for me and for all of us in the program. And, we're still learning a lot of different stories related to dry baby. So.
But part of when you came back from that home visit,
yeah,
what I remember was, first of all, this was done through translation. And so Sadio was like...
Actually, the mom, she spoke English.
Oh, she spoke English,
yeah.
but I remember there were some things you were still not sure
that
you understood.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
And then us trying to understand, so one of the things that we really started to appreciate was they had to leave the dry babies when they came from Burma.
Exactly.
Of course, they wouldn't let them bring them.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah.
So that was something that no one would ever thought to ask about is, did you leave other children a different form of, it just doesn't exist in our thinking. Yeah. So we've had to really understand that those dry babies were arranged in marriage, that they were clothed, that they're, it's a whole tradition that doesn't exist in our culture.
Exactly.
I think one of the key pieces in this slide that you have here is the decision to lie or misrepresent things. I think that just that recognition that it's true that families may not give you correct information, and there's all kinds of reasons why that would be true.
I think it's probably likely, actually, and that we have to figure out, so if we think of a relationship based on honesty, there may be other ways to think about relationships, that understanding the background of why people don't say their real name, their real birth date. Maybe they don't know it. Maybe it is not, has never been safe to have those kinds of details revealed. And how do you get past when you find out that it's not true? How do you resume the relationship with, maybe by our standards, honesty is a building block. What's considered honest may be different. And how do you then repair if you feel like you've been deceived? And not that we have the answers, more that we know that it's an issue and that it really wants to be talked about on the team.
Yeah. There's a couple of parent perspectives here that talk about the experience of having to lie and why. Carol, do you just want to whip through a few of these before we end?
Oh, about
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Yep. Oh, you guys, the audience, we only have 4 minutes, so we're going to just be quick about this. So these were beliefs that people had going into this that we've kind of been understanding not to be true. One of them is that, and study already mentioned this, that we all believed, I think, that matching cultures between the home visitor and the family would be best. And it turns out that some families don't want that. And we've had some really funny conversations about that where people are, they don't believe that somebody who isn't American will understand the American, I'm not saying funny like humorous, but funny, unexpected. Some have been offensive, would you say? I mean, that's...
Yeah, I had a family, I had a coworker who left the job, and she gave me one of her families, and I was supposed to work with them, and she was fine with that. And then the day before we were supposed to go to the transition home visit, she called the other home visitor and said that, I prefer a Caucasian, a white home visitor, because I feel like a white home visitor knows more than non-American or non-white home visitor. So that was really interesting.
And we've just seen that more than a few times. Yeah.
So I think what we'll do is just let you have the rest of these on your PowerPoint, because there's a number of points about this, but our time is up. But I think that they're really great. If you read through these beliefs that have been challenged, I actually think you'll get some really good information.
And then I do want to say hopefully you have a handout. It has, I think, 27 things that we've come up with that we haven't been able to talk about. Some of them we have, but please feel free to give us feedback about that. If you have more, we can just keep compiling these different recommendations from everybody's experience.
So our summary is simply that, gosh, parents want what's best for their children, but that also that what's best is culturally determined. That families from different cultures think what we are doing is just as incomprehensible as what we think they are doing, and that relationship is possible regardless of language and cultural differences. And we have really enjoyed doing this, so I always feel like I'm learning a lot when we're doing this, but we really thank everybody who's been part of it. I put some acknowledgments at the back that are just folks that supported our cultural forum.
And we would really love feedback. It's so helpful when we're trying to put together stuff like this for you to really tell us bluntly, if you don't mind, what's useful for you, what's not useful, what you would like more of, what you would like less of. So thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.